now congressional candidate Fallon. He's there every time we ask. We'll end with Representative Fallon.
It's great to see so many people here that I know and I've known for a long, long time. I'm sorry I've known you for that long, really, Brian. We got together when you first started fighting this thing down in Page County. And, the Robbins family as well. A lot of people that have been through a lot. And the Haskell County folks, thank you all for coming. And thank you to my mostly former colleagues, but never did quite serve with Representative Grassley, but I'm glad to know you're working on this issue. I want to say a couple things too. I don't think we're here to condemn condemnation per se. There are some legitimate uses of eminent domain, and I think it's important that we remind people that we are not just here to say flat out, you know, eminent domain is wrong all the time. But unfortunately, the amount of abuse of eminent domain has grown significantly. And it is clearly a property rights issue, but there's a lot of coalition to be built here because it's also an issue of farmland. We all know how valuable Iowa farmland is getting with the competition between corn for ethanol, corn for food. And with the world's population continuing to grow, farmland is critical to this state and to this nation and to our world. And any time it is squandered with a bad development idea, that's something we need to be thinking about. Also, it's an environmental issue. I know your canyon, Coyote Canyon, is just a beautiful gem of greenbelt in addition to all the farmland along here. I know that here in Polk County, there's been the issue of extending Martin Luther King Parkway through what is a beautiful environmental area. It's also an issue of poverty. Maybe you're familiar with the situation in Burlington, Iowa, where about 400 low-income people were removed from their homes. And this is a good example of the problem that you identified, Jeff. They were removed from their homes, and those homes were condemned in order to accommodate another strip mall, which, by the way, was never built. Never built. So there are plenty of examples around the state where poor folks in the cities are being forced from their land for a bad development decision. So there's a lot of coalition building to be done here, and I'm glad to see that happening. This is also not a partisan issue, and I know I'm not the only Democrat who cares about this, because back in, what, was it 2006? Pretty much the last vote I took was overriding the governor's veto, and nearly every Democrat in the House voted with us to sustain the House and Senate decision to tighten up the eminent domain law. And that in itself was, and again, I think you refer to this as the second eminent domain bill. Well, this would be the third one if I was still here, because back in late 90s, we had another debate on eminent domain, and we passed a bill. And as the Legislative Council and the state agencies that worked with that chapter of the code looked at it and started to work with it, it turned out there were a bunch of problems. And that's understandable, because that chapter of the code, or actually those chapters of the code, because it's all over the code, are very complex. So it's not hard to imagine that you could pass a bill that looks good, but that turns out to have some tweaks. So the following year we came back, and I was the floor manager of that bill. We tweaked those changes from the year before. And that debate itself was a 4-hour debate, just tweaking the changes that we had made that we found problems with. So I have no doubt that what we did in 2006 probably needs to be addressed a bit. There's probably some loopholes, some changes, and you've clearly identified some of them. And again, a lot of those changes have been identified by the landowners affected. So again, it was not a partisan issue back in the late 90s when we did this. It certainly wasn't a partisan issue in 2006. And in fact, in 2006, we passed that bill by a larger margin than it passed in the late 90s. So I really, you know, as a Democrat, I believe my party has always tried to stand with the little guy. And there's no doubt in my mind that it is the little guy and gal that are being affected by the abuse of eminent domain. I mean, you folks don't have a lot of money. You don't have your own personal lobbyists. You don't have any corporate backing. You're just trying to fight for your livelihood, your property, your homes, and you really shouldn't have to be fighting that hard. This should be a no-brainer. There are situations where it's clear that the proposal is not truly a public need, but for private gain, whether it's a developer or a city involved in collaborating with that developer, and that's just wrong. And I want to see the Democratic Party stand with you as strongly as I am, as strongly as a handful of others have. Again, on record, They did a great job, both Democrats and Republicans, of supporting very strong legislation in 2006. So I commend you for trying to make this as bipartisan as it can be, because it should be that way. I will say this too. You know, your legislator, your senator, your representative from Iowa should be advocating to you. I hate to hear them say sometimes that, sorry, that's a local issue, I'm going to stay on it. Maybe you've heard that from some people. That's wrong. This is, even if it is just a local issue, and you know as well as I do that it has the state authority involved, there's federal money involved, it's much broader than a local issue. But even if it was a local issue, the person you elect locally should be fighting for you and standing with you and trying to help you. If that isn't happening, that's no.